Welcome to the Pro Cheerleading Podcast, hosted by Mhkeeba
and Brittany, two former NFL cheerleaders discussing hot topics in the pro cheerleading industry
and revealing the truth behind the poms.
So, you guys, I listened back to the interview with Kristan while editing, and something in me just wasn't completely satisfied with just parts of the interview that I felt like we could have maybe went deeper. And I think, it being just such a sensitive topic and a conversation that, we're having with Kristan for the first time, I maybe shied away from asking a lot of questions. And this is a follow-up conversation that I'm having with Kristan one-on-one, just to kind of touch on a little bit more deeply some of the emotional and mental effects of what she experienced, because I think when we listen to what people wrote in, you guys are writing, we're not listening, we're reading what you wrote in, of wanting to discuss in more detail, anxiety and just handling all of the stress that goes into being a pro cheerleader. Obviously, the things that happen and that you guys are aware of from the interview with Kristan, that might be kind of like an outlier in terms of what she experienced, but at the same time, it always starts something maybe small, and then it can kind of snowball into something that has that kind of really impact on your mental and emotional well-being. And I just think that I asked Kristan if we could talk again because, and hi Kristan, I'm kind of like talking about it not here. But I just wanted to help everybody understand like why it meant a lot to me and Brittany as well, to try to make sure that we handled this in a way that was as holistic as possible. And then for people who might be experiencing certain things on the squad, because this is all new, right? Like, I think what we obviously knew in taking on this topic is that this is something that if you go to a therapist or you talk to your friends or your family about the stress that you're under, how it's impacting you, how well you're dealing with it or not dealing with it, a lot of people will just tell you to quit. And you're not happy, it's obvious, it's stressing you out, like, why are you doing this? And they don't really understand why you're trying to stick it out and what you're getting out of it. But at the same time, there really isn't you might have your teammates or you might not to rely on for support. But in talking to Kristan, it's like something that we were wanting to provide is just a sense of like, hey, you're not alone. If you need to vent, if you need to talk through it, we're here. We do have our Pro Cheerleading Hotline that we set up eons ago that we haven't really talked a lot about, but we just wanted to open up this conversation again. And Kristan, has agreed to let me probe as deep as I need to go, just kind of with the hopes of just helping people understand what they're experiencing. If it's anything on the level of what you experienced, Kristan, it's not okay. And it's really just like talking through how you build up to that point of realizing when it might be time to either speak up and stand up for yourself or walk away from something that's truly toxic. And so, and that might not even be like walking away from the team. It might be walking away from a mentality or a way of looking at yourself in the mirror. It could be a variety of things that you're letting go of and distancing yourself from because it's just not healthy. And that's what we're hoping this follow-up conversation can really dig a little deeper into. So with that little freaking log, Kristan, jump in, but I'm going to try to be as specific as I can in terms of questions, Kristan, and then, we'll just see where it goes. And again, we're not licensed therapists. What Kristan was hopefully an outlier, but, we saw some of these cases, the Houston Texans cheerleaders that were duct taped. There's been a lot that's happened to women in the sport and industry it's the ugly side of it, right? We're going to get a little ugly.
Yes.
Let's just do it. And we'll work our way through it, and hopefully it'll be helpful to somebody that may just be having a tough time, because let's be real, this world does get to you in different ways. And so I'm going to be vulnerable as well. I know, Brittany and I over the course of the first season definitely tried to touch on some of the heavier topics. So I would encourage any of the listeners to take a listen back at season 1. We had our whole body image episode, Let's Physical, where we talked about what we kind of see as like the lasting effects of our industry and that self-image from a physical perspective of how you look at yourself and how you see in the mirror. So we'll touch on that separately, but this is more like the emotional and mental aspects of our world and how it makes feel about yourself. And so the first question, I guess, Kristan, I would ask, this is the part that haunted me from our first conversation.
Yeah.
I think it was when I asked you about like what you would say to your teammates, but I think what you were saying was something to the effect of really just trying at that time that you were in your last season with the Dolphins, that you were really just trying to make it day to day, and that really going through a lot that your teammates really had no idea about in terms of just how the stress and everything building up of what you were going through, how it was actually impacting you, and that you were just trying to get through day to day. And so I wanted to start with that and just kind of understand from your perspective, and in that last year, what was happening to you, whether it's physically, emotionally, where you kind of were starting to see that this is really, really getting bad. And not so much like what specifically happened, because I think we did cover that in the other interview, but just how it was impacting you from a mental and emotional standpoint.
Well, I will say, like, secrets, like, they make you sick, you know, and I was never that veteran that would put words or stories in the ears and eyes of rookies. Like, I wanted them to shape their own
rookie experience.
Yeah, like when that interview happened my third year, I immediately felt alone. Like I was keeping this big secret, you know, that I had to almost like protect the director and my coaches, because if the rookies knew, it could go two ways. They would know and they wouldn't care, and they would still be cheering on that team, which then would kill me to know that, wow, okay, these girls are okay with it. Or they would find out, and then I would have ruined their experience. And so I just wanted them to form their own opinion.
Totally relate to that. Just like you're not trying to, you're rookies, they're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and you don't want to kind of like, well, here's all the dirt on how this really goes.
Right.
Like,
and it's just not what I believe in either. Like, I'm not going to go around and just like talk crap about, you know what I mean? And not really that I would be talking crap. I mean, it sucked what happened, you know, but so what started happening was like I would start having these cheerleaders come up to me, and they started connecting the dots, and they were like, something's like changed about you. Like, and it's funny because I think back and it's like ever since that interview, something's just been different about you. And I'm like, holy cow, like I'm really keeping this in right now. And that's what I started out with by saying, is that you hold a secret in and it's going to make your body sick and you feel alone. And I wanted so desperately to like talk to somebody, but by that time, I just didn't know who to trust, because my director and coaches were telling me that it was my teammates who told them, you know, about me waiting for marriage. And so I was like, well, who do I turn to? Who do I trust? Like, am I alone in this? And so that feeling of isolation, and I guess just not having anyone to vent to, that was the starting of it all. Not having anyone to trust, not having someone like you, like a podcast. Like, can I just check in real quick and see if this is okay? Like, is this legal? Because at this point in time, I'm brainwashed, you know, and I've been in the program now for like 2 years going on my third. And so like my brain is pretty warped by now. After that, it started shifting into confusion and fear. And the confusion and fear is like, I used to walk into practice, like nervous as always, you know, like you get a little nervous every time you go. You have the practice before the actual practice, you know.
Make sure you have your stuff together.
It has to be perfect. And that's their expectation, right? Is that you cannot mess up once you hit that field. So I used to walk in nervous. That's normal for a performer. But then it turned into fear, where I was terrified to like go to practice, to even be seen.
Let's just be real. Like when you're miserable or something has happened that you really, like you said, can't trust to share with other people, you aren't really sure how well you fit on a team at this point. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you're still on it. So you're trying to still show up and do what you need to do to kind of survive to the next day of being on a team. I mean, if it starts impacting your performance, you know, to me, what I'm hearing is just kind of a lot of masking and not dealing because you really don't have a there's no place for processing it. You know what I mean? Because you're really
Right.
unsure of what good it would do to say anything to anybody.
Exactly.
You already know that your teammates have kind of put you out there with your director to make you look bad, telling lies about how you were conducting yourself with fans, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so showing up at practice like everything's cool and kosher when it's not is a lot to take on when you're actually suffering through a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's the scariest moment for a woman is when you can't even trust your own intuition. Like that moment where you just can't trust yourself at all. And the backfire of that is that you end up then not trusting anyone else. You know, like when you've been manipulated for so long and you thought that you knew what was okay and what wasn't, and then you end up in an interview room and you're like questioning everything, you begin to just not trust yourself. And I feel like after that interview, like I looked myself in the mirror after what they said, and I'm looking at myself through my eyes and I'm like, you can leave right now. Like you can walk out of this interview room. You don't have to follow through with putting on this little tiny bikini so they can judge your body to see if you're calendar ready. You can walk out. And I literally had that conversation with myself, and it was like this robotic experience. It was like I was just the Barbie, you know, I was putting on the clothes that fit. I was walking out, and it was just, I was a walking robot. And I put on the bikini after they had just brought up my virginity and like I was a dirty virgin and how it wasn't beautiful and I needed to develop into this woman. And now I'm standing in this bikini in front of all of them, and I'm turning at every angle while they take my photo. And I felt so exposed. And I just remember walking out of that interview just in pieces. Like that was the beginning of losing myself. That was the beginning of me kind of in this battle of selling my soul for approval. You know, when what used to matter was, am I a good human? You know, am I decent? Am I beautiful on the inside? Like I would have heart checks, you know, like personal reflection time. And now I'm turning into this robot who is so stressed and scared that I'm going to get in more trouble and cause more turmoil on the team, that I'm now more focused with what I look like on the outside. And I'm going through the motions, putting on the triple layer of mascara, like I'm putting on extra makeup. I'm making sure my lipstick is perfect. Because after that interview and me like voicing myself and sending that mass email to the director and all the coaches asking, what did I do to deserve this? You know, like what happened was I started getting nitpicked on. Like, oh, you don't have enough lipstick on. Go back in the locker room. Oh, your hair isn't curly enough. Go back in the locker room. Oh, you've gained a few pounds. You're not calendar ready. If you don't lose this much weight, you're not invited to calendar anymore. And like, I never had a problem with my weight. But now my stress levels are so high that my cortisol levels are so high. And cortisol levels being high in women, you're going to have weight gain. And I had never struggled. NFL cheerleaders, like we talk weight gain, and it's like something so little and petty.
Right, we're probably talking about a difference of 3 to 5 pounds, probably max. That's causing a huge uproar of you're not ready for this, that, and the other. And
it's a huge scale of a difference between the standards of NFL cheerleading and then like what we should be okay with in the real world, you know?
Right.
And I know like on my team, like if you gained 3 or more pounds, you were suspended. So,
same with ours back
then. So for me, when your cortisol levels are high, when you get to a certain level of stress, your body doesn't know how to come off of that stress. So you're constantly living in this overproduction of cortisol because it's just trying to fight for you. And I know we talk about like there's fight, there's freeze, and there's flight. And I was more of like a freezer. Like I just froze and I didn't know how to fight back. I didn't know what to do except like I would tear up. I would just cry to myself after cheer practice, or I would call my mom. But something super duper important that I do want women out there who are still cheerleading is that some people will use manipulation to like belittle your pain. so they won't have to be held accountable for their behavior. Trust is earned, and you're not a doormat. And all of you that are still cheering are obviously so stunningly strong. Sometimes we feel broken and like we're not okay, and we're afraid to admit that as NFL cheerleaders because our job is to portray this performance of perfection. But I want them to know, like, it is okay not to be okay. And not being okay doesn't mean that you lack joy or you need to feel guilty about having feelings. It just means like you're strong enough to be soft. And being soft means that you're vulnerable.
And being honest with your feelings, because I think it takes a lot to be able to look in the mirror to be honest with yourself that day. Like, you know what? I feel XYZ, like I don't feel great today. Because some days it's just like that. You aren't feeling yourself. You know what I mean? It could be so many different things that can sway that. But I think the minute that we're not honest with ourselves and we're trying to like mask and pretend, and sometimes you got to get through some shit. Like you might have to just put your game face on to get through the day, but you still have to have that moment, that private moment with yourself where you're doing your own self-check of how are you really doing. And like you said, it's okay to be vulnerable enough to accept where you are or how things are impacting you so that you can I think that's the beginning of trying to work through it, is at least acknowledging the space that your feelings happen to be in that moment. You know, you could be broken, but you're learning as you grow as a woman to like figure out how to build yourself back up and put your pieces back together. And if you're never really like assessing where you are and how broken things might be, it makes it a lot harder to try to rebuild, especially if you're getting beat down day to day. I mean, you got to kind of do a daily rebuilding to make yourself whole again, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, it does. And sometimes you just get in the cycle of that fast life. Once you get out of that habit of those heart checks, you then get into a new habit of avoiding it and ignoring it and just pretending like, oh, well, my teammates don't have a problem with the way my coaches are talking to me. Why am I feeling like this? Am I the only one feeling like this? Like, I'm too afraid to ask them because then they're just going to go to my director or my coaches and tell them that I asked them, you know, and it's just going to put me in an even worse situation. So this was not a good memory, but I got told so many times, oh, you're just too sensitive. Oh, you're just sensitive. And let me tell you, again, when I said like that manipulation to belittle your pain, people who say you're just too sensitive, again, they do not want to be held accountable for their own behavior. They are not taking responsibility for how they are treating you. And so they're using manipulation as a power mechanism to try to put fear into you. And for the longest time, I would have girls on the team be like, how can you just be yourself around them? And I'm like, well, because we're all human. And like, I didn't understand why girls were afraid. And then it became my turn, you know, and now I'm in my third year and I finally am shaking in my boots. But living in this stress and confusion and just really going through all of the stages of being gaslighted and just going through that cycle and not even trusting myself, it started turning into, you know, those physical manifestations where I was getting headaches. I couldn't go up 5 stairs without getting super dizzy. I was calling my doctor, like telling him that he needs to figure this out. This isn't me. This is hurting my performance. I'm a really energetic cheerleader, and now I'm trying to catch my breath after going up a few steps. Like, I was questioning my own sanity, being rushed to the emergency room with what I now know as just a panic attack. You know, I was not sleeping at night. I had to quit all of my other jobs my third year. So I was literally not getting by, like, at all. Like, I got in so much debt because I was just trying to stay alive. And I was trying all these different energy drinks. I started getting heart palpitations and I was having sleep paralysis. This was not just an in-my-face attack. Like, this was also a spiritual battle. I just got baptized and I just gave my life publicly to Christ. And then it's like, boom, the gates of hell opened up. And now I'm facing these moments where I'm questioning everything in my life. And like, I don't know if like you can imagine such a psychotic break like that, but I always said, like, I don't understand how a woman would ever tolerate to be in an abusive relationship. And then you get in this box and then you're like, oh my gosh, you know, and you start to wonder, like, have I just not ever had boundaries, or were my boundaries skewed, or just was I not prepared for this test? I would put these little sticky notes all over, and I put Bible verses like in my boots and in my pom-poms, and I would bring them to practice, and I had a little binder, and I just had just notes that I would constantly read, like during water breaks or before practice, that were keeping me strong. My healing took more than time. You know, like my healing took Jesus.
For people who, you know, don't have their faith to rely on and
Right.
going through something like what you experienced, I think I'm hearing even things that, regardless of that, may help, you know, as you're navigating, because I'm listening and I'm hearing, one, how everything was impacting you, two, just the ways that you were trying to reach out to people around you for, you know, that sanity check, like, hey, am I crazy, or is this right? Is this wrong? You know, because you're doubting yourself and you're questioning that meter of like boundaries.
Right. Yes.
You're just being tested. We have listeners of all ages, but people
right,
who
of course,
haven't been, you know, difficult situations that really test everything of who you are, what you're about, how you're going to show up, what morals that you have that you're going to sacrifice to fit in, to be popular, to not stand out, to not seem like a goody-goody. It could be virginity. It could be something else, you know. It could just be your own sense of what is right that you are not being true to at any given point because of whatever, fill in the blank. You feel pressured to, you really want to fit in with a particular group. You're looking for validation or approval from other people.
Exactly.
You start straying away from your true self that sends you down this path where it's really, really uncertain and angry. And you know, what I'm hearing you say is just that there were certain things that started to come together in your life that helped you realize how to build yourself back up again. And I think for people who are listening that, you know, this is kind of centered around what you experienced with your virginity and how you were being treated because of it. But this relates in so many different ways. And I'm just trying to like help listeners kind of understand how this is really relevant no matter what you're struggling with. Whenever you start getting messed with in your life, like you could be a job, be happy as a clam, and the next thing you know, you're getting tested for whatever reason. You might start being treated unfairly by your boss all of a sudden. I mean, these are things that I'm thinking of that at least draw upon my own experience where, you know, people start effing with you. There's just no cue.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's really what it boils down to. And
they start nitpicking, calling out your flaws. Yeah.
Just all that stuff. Like, this is how I left the Gates Foundation here in Seattle. It was a job that I had. I was perfectly happy. It was Super Bowl year. Everything's going great. I'm up here doing what I do, balancing everything, handling everything. And all of a sudden I became the punching bag for this woman who was my manager to try to start effing with me on every level possible. And I didn't know myself and trust myself that like, hey, there are no grounds for her to be messing with me. I know I'm doing a good job at work. I know I'm balancing a lot with, you know, seagulls at the time. But I'm just thinking for people who are going through something and they maybe aren't trusting that instinct to know that this isn't me. This is somebody else's energy that's coming toward me and picking at me and trying to make me feel less than who I am. And so, but it's all those things that just start mounting, and it almost just seems like, damn, is Mercury in retrograde, or like what the actual hell's happening? Where I'm taking it from all angles. And if you don't have people that you can come up for air with to say, this is what's going down. Is it me? Did I do something wrong? Or does this sound right to you? And I just think in our space, especially because there's so many little tiny squad dynamics, like we all get it. There's like the politics of being on a team and what people may be doing to try to get in that light or be in the favor of the director or what have you, or push other people down so that they can rise and look good and all those
it's
things.
So vindictive.
It's a space where it's very like kind of behind your back or very small or very petty. If you start experiencing that and it keeps just kind of snowballing and turning into something where you clearly have a mark on your back and it's starting to wear on you. And I just think that's just kind of I won't even say survival of the fittest, but I think when people see that everyone's getting away with attacking one person, sometimes other people do it too. They join in or they don't support one another through it. You know what I mean?
It's the story of the scapegoat.
Yeah, literally. And as long as it's like, if they're messing with this person, the focus is not on me, then hell, I guess I'm okay with it. Having a support group of people that you can trust to talk to, that will understand and relate to what you're experiencing, when you had your mentor, and just all those people in your life that are good for you. Because I think that sometimes pro cheerleading, you kind of get so caught up in the world, you know, you almost forget who you knew and who was important to you. Not like you forget, but it's really
right.
your schedule. You spend so much time with these people that they become your new world. Sometimes can get swept up into that new world and forget who you are outside of it. And sometimes by the time you try to touch base with those people, you know, you're so far in and they can't really relate to why experiencing is such a big deal. But you kind of need your people, and it may not be on the team, but I just think that's what we're hoping with this podcast, and in general, these episodes, whatever, will help people understand that we do get it. And this is how you can lose yourself. That stress and that anxiety and all those things that can make you dread going to practice, not really knowing who you can trust because your teammates are talking shit about you behind your back, or whatever might be going on. All those things, especially if you're holding it in, it becomes poison. And I can see how, from what you're saying, like that will turn into physical manifestations in your body. You know, whether you're not sleeping, whether you're eating more, eating less,
right.
you know, waking. It sometimes shows up in your skin with outbreaks, and then you're just making your life even more hell because,
right.
But you know, we all know that when your skin is not acting right, when you're on a team, it becomes effing hell. But it's just all those ways of it showing up. And I just think that expressing it or finding a way to get the emotional support that you need to start to rebuild yourself again is what I'm hearing in your experience is crucial to that journey, because you're going to grow through it. You know what I mean? Whether that's through your faith or whether that's through just time or maturity or character. It's just like you kind of just reach that point, that epiphany, that moment where you're just like, man, you really decide whether it's about fighting harder or just walking away from something. And for me, just to go back to like the Gates Foundation, that was the first time in my life I left a job without having a job in place. Yeah. And I was struggling with it because I was like, I'm not getting pushed out of here, you know, like,
right.
Got a problem. I'm like talking to HR. I'm doing what I know I need to do because I knew it wasn't right. It wasn't even a question of like, could it be me? Like, no, I knew it was not, but I'm up here fighting and I'm not getting anywhere. And I'm trying to figure out how much am I going to push? Because by the time I push and fight, am I even really going to want to be here? You know what I mean?
Right.
If it takes all that for me to scream at the top of my lungs of how I deserve to be treated, if it's going to take all that, by the end of the day, I'm probably not even going to want to stick around. And so
well, exactly, because it's like, well, if it takes me coming out of my character to finally be heard, then I need to start questioning who I'm working for. Because it shouldn't take someone getting super escalated to finally be heard. Like, it should have been dealt with on a more appropriate level. And like cheerleaders are not heard. Yeah.
No, and there's no clear path. Like, we would meet the HR lady when we're signing our W-4s in the very beginning, but it was definitely a sense of like, hey, if you're ever experiencing something that you don't think is fair or right, reach out to Homegirl, because no, that was not an option. You dealt with the director only. You were not part of the larger organization where you can just be calling somebody up. Everything was supposed to go to the director. So
it would be cool if cheerleaders were unionized, you know, because then they would have someone outside to talk to and like they would be more protected. But there's a few, I don't know, tips that I could have is like, you know, make friends outside of your team.
Yeah.
And get connected with someone older and wiser, you know, and keep a journal. Write down your moods, write down your emotions after your interview, write down what was said. I kept a journal and dated every day my third year because I just needed to have something to look back at. Because when you are under a lot of stress, which you don't even realize that you don't realize how much stress you're under as an NFL cheerleader until you get out. And then once you get out, you're like, how did I do that? You know, and the really amazing thing about humans is that we are so adaptable. Like, we can adapt to anything. And you walk into the atmosphere of NFL cheerleading and you're like, whoa, this is so shocking. But then what was once shocking becomes the norm, and now you've adapted. Yeah. And now you've adapted to something that's toxic. And now you think that toxicity is okay in the norm, and what was once normal is now completely unusual. And so your levels of what you tolerate have now been skewed. And in your mindset, you're now thinking like, oh, I'm supposed to feel worthless. I'm supposed to feel replaceable. And I think that's where it hurt the most, when you're caught in the middle of knowing, do I fight harder? Do I try harder? Or do I walk away? And is walking away going to make me weak? Or am I staying, am I strong? Or is it the opposite? You know, and like when you're really caught in the middle of east and west and north and south and which way do I go? It's just part of wisdom is knowing where you're weak so you don't have to be so strong. And in those moments, you really have to ask yourself, like, am I trying to live by what is impressive to others? Or am I genuinely on the path of living for what's real to me? And if you can look in the mirror and really truly just hear the sound of your heart and listen, dive deep into your soul and check your level of exhaustion. Like, are you exhausting yourself just to seek approval to get the point of the pyramid? Like, are you hiding your truest form of feelings just so you are closer to the front when you perform in the end zone? You know, like, what are you fighting for? And is it going to matter in 30 years? You know, like, is starving yourself for the calendar shoot that week prior, was that worth it for a piece of paper that can burn so easily with the light of a match? You know, like, are we fighting so hard to be as fragile as pieces of paper that are just going to fade? Like, what are we truly fighting for? I am so proud that I was an NFL cheerleader. Like, being an NFL cheerleader was amazing. There's so much more to it than just being a model. There's so much more to it than just being a dancer. You are a representative. But it's just the things that can happen to your psyche while you're an NFL cheerleader. And some women can last 3 years, 5 years, even 6 years. And they were able to not have a psychotic break. And that's amazing for them, you know, but just in my personal story, and I don't believe I'm alone in this. I just feel like sometimes it takes a little longer, like once you get out of the box, to realize what you were tolerating. And if we can somehow help the people that are in the box now kind of get their boundaries straight and get their facts straight of what's right and what's not and what's acceptable and what's just cruel, then, you know, that's what it's going to take. But like that constant repeat and reel of you're replaceable, all we need is a pretty face and a uniform, anybody can take your job. Well, you know, that does kind of mess with your ego, and you're like, oh, well, geez, like now I have to fight. Like, if I leave, just somebody else is going to take my position, you know, and you've worked so hard and you've put your whole heart and body and mind and sweat and tears and breakups and everything that you go through to be a cheerleader. You put your whole life into this, and just to have someone else just replace you because you weren't quote unquote strong enough to handle it, you know, it puts this pressure on you that even when you're not well, you have to pretend to be well. And, you know, you get used to playing the part. You get used to the scripts and rehearsing the role that you have to play instead of being a real human with a beating heart. And it's like we lose our identity through a uniform.
And the truth of the matter is, it's like the same way that people can lose their identity in a relationship. It's the same. I mean, because this is really about your personal, the relationship you have with yourself, whether it's a relationship with a significant other
or a job. It
could be anything that puts you through this spin cycle where you forget who you are, or you lose touch with your feelings. You're listening to other people that think you value in a certain way that you trust, and then they end up manipulating you into thinking that you're worth nothing. And And obviously, this is not necessarily representative of the entire industry, but I just really wanted to make sure that we spoke again, because I think on some level, and this really is thanks to a lot of the women that came forward, that, it breaks my heart to this day, that that are flat out ostracized from our pro cheerleading community because of coming forward to fight and to change the narrative and to make it better, so that stories like yours or things that they experience is not the norm anymore. And for the past year that we started this podcast, Brittany and I mean, we've seen a shift of the narrative of these teams, and it's not every team's terrible. We're not even trying to make that argument. It's just, we definitely have seen a lot of attention paid to changing this perception of what NFL cheerleading is all about, what the teams are all about, what the women are all about, and it's all hoorah, empowerment, yada, 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 which is great. But at the end of the day, if people aren't really walking that walk and talking that talk, then this is still going to be going on some level, maybe not to the extent that you experienced it, but it's one thing that I just want to say to you, Kristan, and, just that I think this interview, this conversation definitely opens up something that has been a very strong passion point for me, even in starting the podcast, that these voices have to be heard, number one, because they matter, number two. And number three, we gotta, just as an industry, I just feel like we have to do better to support one another, because the one thing that came to mind, as I was getting contacted by reporters before we started the podcast, wanting to talk, like, what's it like being an NFL cheerleader? Like, did you experience stuff? And I had some freaking stories that I could have shared.
Yeah.
But I was kind of like, I knew what kind of heat, and that's not why I didn't talk to them, P.S., but I knew what kind of heat would come from my former teammates, or actually, at the time I was still on the team too, or I just retired, but I knew what kind of ruckus was going to stir from speaking publicly about what my experience, not speaking for everybody else, but just my experience on the team was about, or things that happened that I wasn't a fan of while I was on the team. And I knew that there would be like an uprising of everybody acting like I was just making shit up, or, like it was just not representative of everybody else's experience, and everybody would have been the loudest roar of how amazing it was. And I would have been out there on Front Street. I knew that. And this was, and then I'm starting to see the lawsuits that, that were filed with different women coming forward. And it bothers me to my core. Like I actually like tremble with just passion, I guess, because when I think about the people who came forward to sue, or even speaking to the press, because even that was a big thing, and having your name printed and speaking to the press. The people who came forward to speak up about shit that just was not right in our space, it was completely their experience, have been completely ostracized. The black sheep of the freaking pro
organization,
like no teammates, hearing about what you experienced and the extent to which you have been isolated, it was heartbreaking for me. And I literally, I can feel it trembling and reeling up in me again, because it's just so not right. And I think beyond just whatever happened with you and the specifics, this is your account of everything that happened. There's two sides, and the door is wide open for anybody to come and reach out to us if they want their story told in response. That's really not the point of this episode, but I just want to say to everybody who's listening that this could be it is a beautiful experience. We all know there's people who are aspiring to join us as pro cheerleaders, who are auditioning their asses off, training, etc., so that they can experience the joy that being a pro cheerleader brings. It's not like it's all bad. It's amazing. But when it comes down to the things that can poison and make our world toxic, like, we have to do better to support one another. Like, whatever that means. Like, it doesn't have to mean like we all become like freaking Harriet Tubman out there and just, start freaking marching and picketing, whatever the hell. But we can't do people in our space that have had the courage to come forward. We cannot just leave them out there on Front Street alone. And when I think of people who have held the teams accountable for wage theft, for not paying the women appropriately, for having really effed up practices in terms of the employment, and these things needed to happen. They needed to happen. it took a woman having the courage to do it, and she's actually doing it on behalf of the rest of the team who's not speaking up because she knows it's the right thing to do, and only to have it where they hate you for it, you know, like the Buffalo Bills cheerleader that came forward and sued the team because they weren't getting paid and mentioned some of their shitty ass practices. Okay, they did get rid of the team, but do you really think that was because of that girl coming forward? No, she did it to try to draw attention to what was not fair, what was not right. And for teams that were BSing and not paying their women and coming up with all kinds of effery, I mean, I'm a cursor, but especially when I get mad. But,
I love it.
For the teams that were fucking around with the girls' money and like not paying them appropriately, like having them come out of pocket, paying them a certain amount of game at the end of the season, all the nonsense that was going down, it took one girl to say, fuck this is not right, it's illegal, and I'm actually going to move forward with fighting for what I know is right. And these cheerleaders got a freaking settlement out of it. They got back pay from it.
You're welcome.
They changed the minimum wage and how they were paying the girls because of these women that came forward. So what I just want to say, and I just thank you for being willing to share with us what you experienced, where you were coming from, how this impacted you, how this changed your life, how you came to the decisions that you came to around fighting harder versus walking away. And it just really triggers the point that I'm making, that in doing something like that, putting yourself out there to actually to help other people. Clearly you were not the only girl that was getting fucked with on that team. Let's be real. Like, I'm sure there were other little instances of people who could have been able to say, you know what, actually, that's kind of how that person gets down as a manager, as a director or whatever. Like, I've seen it, I've experienced it, this is what happened to me. But it takes somebody who has the courage to move forward in this very scary, litigation is no joke, and having it be in the public eye playing out is also adds a whole other element of stress. Whether we lose listeners or not, I just think if people have a problem with trying to get this message out there of like, they're not alone, this is what it's like to experience some of the shit. If you're part of the problem, then guess what? We're talking to you. I'm talking to you. Like, cut the shit. Like, honestly, like if you are part of creating a toxic environment, maybe because you got shit on or because it's the cute thing to do, it's fucked up, flat out, in the story. And you're either going to be part of a solution, and I understand that there are limitations around, and I'm not trying to act like I'm on some preachy, judgmental tip, but it's just like, we have to try to do better than where we are. And I think as long as people like you, the women who have sued their teams to try to like fight for rights that we should have been granted without having to fight for it, like, as long as you guys are on the outside of like the pro cheerleading industry and treated like black sheep, I mean, I'm not going to be okay with that. I just think it's bullshit and terrible because you took a very brave step to make the situation better for everybody so that nobody would have to go through what you're going through. So people who are listening, who are training and trying to audition for these teams to be part of that beautiful dream, so that they don't have a shitty, fucked up experience like you did. And I just want to say thank you for being so open about everything. I mean, I love the way that you just talk because I don't even have to jump in with a million questions, but I just really appreciate that you were willing to share that, because at the end of the day, I think you had the best intentions of trying to be true to yourself, be true to your faith, and actually making a positive difference for people who were on that team or coming behind you to do it. And like you said, a little girl that might be wanting to do that one day. And I just think it may not seem that way now, but I'd like to think that we're better than that as an industry, and that by sharing your story, you have touched somebody who may be going through a different variation, different spin of what you experience, and maybe has a little bit more to work from to work through that. Does that make sense? I mean, that's kind of why I wanted to bring you back and to talk through it, because it just really wasn't sitting right with me that even after everything that you've been through that was messed up and not right, just trying to correct that turned into something where you're ostracized from the Christian community, ostracized from the cheerleading community, you know, and that broke my heart. And I just didn't think that we could leave that there without kind of talking through it some more. So I've been talking for like 20 minutes, but if you had any...
No, I love it. I mean, I love your fire and your passion. I I wish I had some of your backbone.
But I mean, people are younger, you know, and when I think back to when I was in my 20s, believe it or not, I was worse than this. Like, you couldn't tell me shit. I was very weak. Talk about chips up to here on my shoulder. Like, you couldn't rock me one way or the other. I knew who I was. I was on my way to where I was going, and I just was very, very, even more emboldened. But with wisdom, you also learn about which battles you're picking and
Exactly.
when your strength is actually in walking away. Sometimes your strength is in your silence if you're in certain situations. Sometimes it is speaking very, very loudly about what you're passionate about. So, I mean, there's just life takes different journeys where you're learning how to navigate through things. I just think that everybody's going to eventually find that growth in their development as a woman. And I sure as hell hope so, because it's like when you find your voice and you really value that voice, like you use it in a way that's just so powerful. And you stand up to a shitty relationship that you could be in where you're not being treated the way you're treated. You stand up in those situations where you have a job where you're not being valued, and you go find a better one that'll pay you more money and treat you the way you want to be treated. And pro cheerleading is no different. You know, maybe there's a different team out there for you that can offer you the experience of a lifetime without the negative, detrimental aspects of it. And I encourage anybody who's experiencing something that sounds anyway familiar with just a very toxic environment, that's not where you're meant to be. It's not where you're meant to be. I nobody should be going through that kind of shit. Point blank, period, end of story. And I took over you saying stuff, so I'm gonna shut up.
No, stop. No, you are saying everything that's true and powerful, you know, and you're completely right. Like, no amount of money, no amount of fame, no amount of status, title,
nothing.
Nothing is worth you living in misery and losing yourself. And I think that's just what it comes down to. And if all women just repeated the words, I am her, then I feel like we would all be on the route to like support each other. Yeah. Because we all are her. We all have been her. You know, every situation that we've been through, we all relate at least on one or two levels, you know, and like we've all been there, like I am her and she is me. And you know, you mentioned like heartbreaking, being out there and speaking up about something. Like, just because you're scared doesn't mean that you can't be courageous. You know, like being courageous doesn't mean that you're not going to feel afraid. Being courageous, you know, just means that you're going to do it when your palms are sweaty and your kneecaps are shaking and your voice is cracking. And sometimes you can't find the perfect words, and so you beat yourself up, but you do it anyway. And because you know that the ultimate goal is not for you to reap the benefits. Like, I knew that I wasn't going to reap any benefits of me speaking out. I knew the consequences of it, but the ultimate goal was never for me. The ultimate goal was for her. And I think like that's just where people get it twisted. I am not against the NFL. I am not against cheerleaders. I don't want to ban cheerleaders. I think that if we as a world constantly just ban organizations who were bad, then nothing is ever truly going to get fixed. No. Like, we can't just ignore the problem, or else history is going to repeat itself. We have to face it, you know, and then we have to change it. Like, we can't just ban everything. Like, we would have nothing left. If we truly looked in the mirror, no organization, no business, nothing would be left. And all these people, like, once we started speaking out, they're like, oh, these women cause too much trouble. Just get rid of cheerleaders.
The NFL lawsuits, you know, the peppering of them, you know, yours, Bailey's, the Texans cheerleaders, and, you know, the different news articles that were trying to find other people who experience similar things. And then next thing you know, there's the Yahoo article that exposed that the NBA treats their dancers very similarly. And then what do we have here in May? Like the little picking them off one by one of like dismantling teams and, oh, they're just causing too much trouble. They've given us a stain. And the next thing you know, they're just picking us off. I mean, it's so fascinating, not fascinating in a good way, but fascinating to think about what really transpired in this year that we've started, because they're trying to show you that speaking up, okay, you got a problem with it, like the Buffalo Bills, you don't have a team anymore. The San Antonio Spurs, no team anymore. Then Dallas Mavs, guess what? No team anymore. What we're seeing is how intimidation, fear, all that plays into not using your voice. But I just think, not necessarily with this podcast, but just trying to like unify our community of dancers and pro cheerleaders and people who want to do this one day to really just stand up for one another. I love I Am Her. I think that is a perfect way of capturing how we have to try to have each other's back and support one another. And damn it, you don't want to shame people into doing the right thing, but hell, I think that's kind of, where a lot of corporations are these days. It's like, they know that if they screw up, guess what? It might end up being viral information that ends up being way more painful to deal with than just doing the right thing. And I'm not suggesting that we just end up, like you said, banning people or putting organizations on blast, but I know for sure that we can, whether it's through using our hotline, writing into us, asking for advice, and trying to figure out and work through these situations with teams that might not be as pleasant. I think we can just figure out collectively a way to move forward where we're not taking shit anymore. Frankly, that's really what it boils down. And it just takes having empathy and recognizing the power and the strength in not even numbers, but just us choosing to stand together. Cutting you guys down for stepping forward and ostracizing you. I want to look at myself in the mirror and know that I tried to stand up for what was right, both for myself and for others. And I just think that in these situations, you figure out what you're really made of. And if you can't stand up for somebody who's being put down and attacked or bullied or whatever, it says a lot about where you stand within yourself. And I'm not saying that in a judgy way. I just think it's a challenge to just see if there's a better way of dealing with situations like that.
Right.
Because if you could imagine if 5 women came together on your team who maybe saw what you experienced or experienced something on their own, what a difference it would make to have that kind of a voice speak up versus just one person alone. I know that it's not like a solution, an easy solution, and, trying to just bring it back home to just being emotionally and mentally sound in this experience. You can't do it alone. Like, you can't suffer alone. You can't suffer in silence. And so you can't, like, you literally can't. And
you won't survive it.
A situation that's not as intense and terrible as maybe what you experienced, but it could just be like, yo, I'm not doing okay with meeting all of these obligations. Like, my head is spinning. I'm stretched too thin. Things are getting stressful, and I'm not staying on top of everything. And then my boyfriend's mad at me because I'm never spinning around and I keep taking these extra promos and the whole world can start caving in different ways where you start to experience like a lot of this just meltdown, if you will. And I think it takes just being patient with yourself enough to stop and be still and listen to what you're feeling, what you're struggling with, to start to kind of piece together how to get out of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes you have to isolate certain things. Like, yo, I gotta just focus on work right now, get this shit together, and then, you know what I mean? Because once you start to prioritize yourself and what you really need and what's like the hottest thing to get under control or what's the most on fire, and you start to try to like channel your energy or really question how stretched you might even be, I think you kind of start figuring out how to move through it. You kind of have to have a way of focusing in on what's most important. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And I mean, that's what the question is, like, what is most important? Like, I could have stayed for 2 more years. I could have done my full 5 years and then left. Like, they didn't fire me. I could have tried to come back again and did tryouts, but I just didn't want to sell my soul, to that kind of mistreatment. So if there are girls out there who are like you said, maybe not on this level like mine of discrimination, but are still getting mistreated, that's not okay. Like, honestly, I had to ask myself, because sometimes we forget that NFL cheerleading is like our job. You know what I mean? Like that is an organization, that is a job. And I would forget that sometimes. And then I started asking myself, okay, if I was working in any other workplace, would that interview would have taken place? You know, like, and you have to ask yourself, oh, would this be like somebody my boss calling me fat? Would that be acceptable if I was working anywhere else?
Yeah.
No. You know, like, NFL cheerleading is a job. Therefore, there are standards. You get so, like, warped into NFL cheerleading that you forget, like, wait, this is my boss. Is she treating me, or is he treating me with the respect that I would be getting somewhere else? And if the answer is no, then you're not alone. And, like, reach out to this podcast. Reach out to me. Like, my Instagram is available. Like, I would love to talk to you. I'd love to answer your questions. Like, I would forward them, you know, to anybody that I know to get your answer if I didn't have the answer. But I just never want a cheerleader out there to have this mistreatment ever ruin their experience, because there are beautiful moments of being an NFL cheerleader. I mean, when else can you travel overseas and go to places like Afghanistan, you know, in a war zone, to give back to the people who are fighting on the front lines for our lives, for our freedom? Like, when can you visit in the hospitals and have these kids that you would have never met before have smiles on their faces, even though they're fighting cancer? Like, when do you get moments like that? Like, being a cheerleader is amazing opportunity. It's extraordinary. I love the good parts of it, but damn, I hate the bad parts of it.
Truth of the matter is, it doesn't have to be bad. It should never be anything like that. The bad should never be that kind of bad. The bad should be, we do take on a lot. We do sacrifice a lot. And, you know, we're not paid a lot. And so there's those kind of negative things that aren't great, but it should never, ever be that bad. And
that bad, yeah.
No, and there's ways for it to just keep getting better too. And that's the hope that I have in, you know, doing this podcast or just being able to talk to different people, is that there's hope in sharing these different stories of how people have moved through it, how people have coped with it, what people have experienced, and just, again, creating that sense of community. So, I mean, I just can't thank you enough.
Like a safe place.
A safe place. It's like, and I'm old and retired, so, I mean, I know I'm not in it in a way that, like, you know, but I don't want people to think that I'm out of touch with what that's like, where you do
stop. You never forget it.
No, you freaking sure don't. And
but you make a difference. Like, you are making such a difference. You are so bold to hold a safe place for people like me. It is such a blessing, and I'm just an outspoken believer, and I know that I do refer to God a lot, and like, I hope that doesn't like turn away anyone, because like, we're all the same, you know, like, I'm just like you, and I don't know, I just don't want anyone to feel alone though. And it's people like you who are keeping the conversation going, and I just couldn't be like just more thankful for your heart and your passion for fighting something that me and so many other women love so much, and to keep it going is what's going to continue the change. And so we just have to keep talking and encouraging others to talk, no matter how many friends you lose, you know?
Exactly. And no matter how many listeners you use, we love everyone. And it's not to sit on some, like I said, judgmental, casting stones kind of space. But I really want us to be better than that for each other. And sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you don't say anything when somebody's being bullied. You don't you laugh at the jokes and making fun of other people, or we're all susceptible to that kind of thing. But I just really want us to all, I love everybody. I'm a lover. I'm a hugger. Like, I see the good.
Me too. I'm an Enneagram too. Neogram too. No, but I just like, integrity is not always doing the right thing, you know, 24/7. Like, integrity is also messing up and then having the courage to take accountability for it, you know, and it's like, that's how you show connection. That's how you make real connections, is like when you can take ownership. And I mean, it makes it real. It makes the bond stronger. And sometimes you do have to move through life and forgive anyway without hearing a sorry. Yeah. And I'm never expecting ever expecting to hear a sorry from them. That's not my place to even expect. Our job is to forgive with no strings attached towards someone else. So do it for you. Finding the answer using your voice, and then the journey of healing and forgiving, that's created for you in your life. I wish that a conversation like this was happening when I was going through what I was going through, because I would have been able to reach out and I would have felt more supported and more safe. So I'm so thankful that you have this purpose of being there for other women. And I truly hope like it is reaching the platforms of the teams, and that the right people are going to hear it at the right moment. And you are going to be an answer, you know, and you are going to be a help on days that are hard, or on days where you're asking, why am I doing this? You know, if you lose followers and whatnot. Yeah, I just don't want you to forget. Like, I mean, if you're looking for the one, you found it, you know, because you have impacted my heart and you have been an answered prayer for my journey. So I just thank you so much.
Thank you. Don't fucking make me cry again. You already did it last time. But just on behalf of Brittany, I mean, I just want to say that it means a lot, because, you know, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary, and it's, you know, there have been times where those questions of like, what are we doing this for? I think the first season we were like, are we talking to ourselves out there? Like, you know, we're talking about these issues that are really hella personal, and, you know, and just really weren't sure if we were like making a difference. It's not like we were trying to like save the world by starting it. It just means a lot to hear that, you know, and every listener that's listening, the people who've reached out to say that it's helped them in one way or the other, or just that they've enjoyed listening or learned anything from listening, like, it does mean a lot. And we just thank you, because I'm hella sentimental because it is coming up on a year, but to know that we can build that kind of community or sense of community or connect people as a community is a huge honor. And Brittany and I, it keeps us going. So thank you so much. And thank you for leaving the door open. We will definitely link your information, and just encourage people to be kind and have empathy. And again, I'm just going to leave it. I am her. I love that. Yeah. But like I said, Brittany said it, we're your friends. We are you and anybody that's going through some tough times. We're always here to listen and help in any way that we can. And this is not, you know, supposed to be a morbid episode, but we knew it was going to be a tough topic, but I just feel good about being able to circle back with Kristan. So thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. I'm not a professional, but it's hard to get back there to like truly walk through step by step. But you know, like if somebody does want to talk, like, I'm there. I think the heart is what matters, and your heart is after making a difference, and so it shall come, and it's happening.
So is yours. And I just think you're just a beautiful soul, and we are so kicking ourselves that we didn't reach out sooner.
Yeah, I'm throwing my pom-pom at you.
Damn it.
Oh my goodness. I mean, honestly, like, it's such a time as this, you know, like, it's God's timing, and it's coming out now, and for whatever reason, it's right now, and maybe someone's gonna need it right now. But I love you already.
I love you too. No, thank you so much.
Dan, have a good night.
Okay, good night, beautiful.